Still unmarried, her ex sneered, unaware she'd wed the strongest vampire king. The city of Eldrith shimmered under the soft glow of lanterns, but the light never reached the shadows where truth lingered. It was a city of grandeur, and whispers where the cobbled streets echoed with stories of kings, queens, and secrets too dark for daylight. In the midst of all this, Leora walked with quiet dignity, though her heart felt bruised from the world's laughter and scorn. She had once been celebrated among the noble circles, a young woman of wit and charm, her laughter echoing like silver in the ballrooms of Eldrith. But all of that had changed. The fall had been swift, and it had begun with a man who thought he could decide her worth. Lord Caelan. He had once courted her with grand words and hollow smiles, promising a life of comfort and attention. But pride, arrogance, and cruelty had turned him blind to the depth of her spirit. One evening, during a lavish gathering, Caelan's sneer had sliced through her with words meant to humiliate. "Still unmarried, Leora?" he had asked, loud enough for every courtier to hear. The laughter that followed was like a blade, and Leora had fled before she could respond. That night, she vowed never to be a pawn in someone else's story again. Bess, she left the city's glittering halls, leaving behind the whispers, the ridicule, and the expectations of a world that saw women as prizes to win.
She walked alone, but the solitude suited her.
She preferred her own company to Caelan's shallow admiration. Yet, even in the quiet alleys of Eldrith, the world seemed to notice her. Shadows moved strangely at the edges of her vision. The wind carried voices she could not quite place, murmurs of things unseen. Leora paused beneath an ancient archway, her hand resting lightly on the carved stone, her thoughts a mix of anger, sadness, and determination. It was then that she felt it. A presence, not human, not mortal, yet not fully alien. She turned slowly, expecting perhaps another lost traveler, another stray noble in hiding. Instead, she found herself gazing into eyes that glowed like embers, red and deep, burning with a power she could not name. The figure was tall, cloaked in a dark garment that seemed to swallow the lamplight. His movements were graceful, deliberate, and every step carried authority and danger. Leora felt a shiver run down her spine, a mixture of fear and fascination. "I've been waiting for you," he said, his voice smooth yet layered with something ancient, something that had survived centuries. I think you have the wrong person," Leora said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. She straightened, refusing to show fear.
"I am no one of importance." The stranger smiled faintly, almost sadly. "Everyone is of importance."
"Some just do not yet know it. You, Leora, are very important indeed." Leora froze. He knew her name, not her title, not the courtly version of her, but her, Leora, as she truly was. Who are you?" she asked, a note of caution threading her words. "I am Azrael," he replied simply. "King of a land you cannot yet imagine, ruler of a lineage cursed by time, bound to shadows you cannot yet see.
And I need you."
Leora blinked. She had heard tales of the vampire kings, beings of unmatched power, feared by mortals and immortals alike.
Stories of their cruelty, their isolation, their eternal hunger. She had dismissed them as myth, fairy tales told to frighten children. And yet here he stood, as real as the stone beneath her feet, as dangerous as the night itself. "I need you for what?" she asked, her curiosity warring with caution. "To end the curse," Azrael said. his voice a low hum that seemed to resonate in her chest. "A curse that has bound my family for centuries. And in doing so, you will be changed forever." "Changed," she repeated, the weight of his words pressing on her. "Yes," he said, stepping closer, though not threatening. "By your courage, your heart, your choices, you could alter the fate of my lineage. But the cost is not yours to choose lightly." Leora's mind raced. Bass. She had always dreamed of power, of freedom, of control over her own life. But this was unlike anything she had imagined. To marry a vampire king? To hold the fate of centuries in her hands? The stories had warned of danger, of temptation, of loss. And yet there was a strange pull she could not resist. "Why me?" she asked softly. "There must be others, mortals or not, who could help you?" Azriel's gaze softened, though the red glow of his eyes remained.
"Because you are not afraid to see the truth, even if it is painful. Because you do not bow to the world's cruelty, even when it burns you."
"Because, Leora, you are free in a way most never are." For a moment, she said nothing. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with the tension of worlds colliding, the mortal and the immortal, fear and fascination, pride and surrender.
You ask much, she whispered.
"Bound. I am not sure I am strong enough for this." "Strength," he said, "is not measured by courage alone. It is measured by choice, by heart, by the willingness to face what others flee from." "I do not ask for perfection. I ask for you." Leora's mind flickered to Kaelin. The sneer, the laughter, the humiliation. She had spent so long running from pain, from shame, from the feeling of being small. And yet here stood someone offering her power, protection, and purpose, not as a gift, but as a choice. I need time," she said finally, her voice steady. "I cannot decide in a moment what centuries demand." Azriel nodded, as if he had expected her hesitation. "Time," he said, "is a luxury I seldom grant." "But I will wait. If you come willingly, the world you know will end, and another will begin." And with that, he turned, vanishing into the shadows as silently as he had appeared. Leora was left alone, the city quiet around her. Yet her heart raced like thunder in her chest. She touched her lips, feeling the memory of his voice, the weight of his gaze, and a strange, undeniable pull toward the impossible. That night Leora returned to her small chambers, sitting by the window as the moon painted silver paths across the streets. She thought of Kaelin, of the life she had known, of the humiliation she had endured. And she thought of Azriel, powerful, terrifying, and intoxicating. A choice lay before her, to remain in the world she knew, small, cautious, bound by fear and pride, or to step into the shadows, into danger, into a destiny that could change everything. And sleep did not come easily. Every shadow seemed to whisper his name. Every gust of wind seemed to carry the promise of a world beyond her imagining. And in her heart, Leora felt something she had not felt in years, a spark of courage, of desire, of longing for more than the mundane, the ordinary, the human. Days passed. She walked the streets again, eyes sharper, thoughts deeper. The world did not seem smaller but larger, filled with possibilities and threats she had never before considered. And always at the edges of her vision she felt him, Azriel, the man of shadows, waiting, watching, daring her to step closer to the fate she had yet to claim. It was during one such evening walk that Kaelin appeared, As if summoned by her thoughts, he looked the same, arrogant and smug, the sneer curling across his lips, like a familiar scar. "Still wandering alone, Leora?" he mocked. "Perhaps no one else finds you worthy." Her chest tightened, old anger rising like fire. But this time, she did not falter. She looked him straight in the eye, and in that moment she realized she no longer feared him. Her life, her choices, were no longer his to command. Kalen laughed, shaking his head, clearly not seeing the change within her. "You always thought yourself clever, yet here you are, still wandering." Still. Nothing.
Lyra smiled faintly, a smile without warmth, yet filled with resolve.
"Bess, I may have been nothing to you," she said quietly, "but I am something far beyond your understanding now." And with that she walked on, leaving him in the dim light, a shadow of the man who had once believed he could define her. That night, Leora returned home to find a single black rose on her windowsill. No note, no explanation, just the rose, dark as the midnight sky, and a whisper of words that seemed to echo in her mind. "Choose, Leora. The world you know will end, or you will remain forever small. Bay." Her heart raced and her choice became clear. The path she had walked so far, alone and cautious, was ending. And somewhere in the darkness, waiting with eyes that burned like fire, a new chapter called her name. Leora took a deep breath, her hands trembling, not with fear but with anticipation. The night had never felt more alive, the shadows never more inviting, the world never more full of possibility. She knew, deep in her heart, that her life would never be the same again. Bay. And for the first time in years, Leora smiled with the certainty of someone who was no longer afraid. The palace of Azrael rose from the cliffs of Eldrith like a dark jewel, its spires piercing the clouds, its walls heavy with the whispers of centuries. Leora stood at the gates, her heart pounding with both awe and fear. The air smelled faintly of roses and old stone, a scent both sweet and bitter, like memories she could not fully grasp. The palace was magnificent, but unlike any she had imagined, more alive, more dangerous, as if it watched her, measured her, and waited for her to falter. Azrael met her at the threshold, his figure tall, draped in a cloak darker than midnight. His red eyes gleamed as he regarded her, unreadable yet intense. "Welcome," he said softly, his voice like velvet on steel. "This is your home now." I am not sure I belong here," Leora admitted, glancing at the towering gates and the endless halls beyond. "Bye." "You do," Azrael said firmly, "but you must learn to see this world as it is. Break. Not as mortals imagine it, not as you imagined your life before." She followed him through the halls, the walls adorned with tapestries depicting battles, kings and queens long gone. Statues of figures frozen in silent command lined the corridors, their eyes seeming to follow her as she walked. The air hummed with power, an invisible pulse that made her skin tingle and her mind race. "This is," she began, but words failed her. "Bay. It is more than I imagined." Azrael's lips curved slightly. Just the hint of a smile. "Many mortals never see beyond the glitter of gold." "You will." Leora's first days in the palace were filled with lessons. But not lessons of manners or courtly etiquette, but of shadows and power. She learned the history of Azrael's line, the curses, the betrayals, the wars that had lasted centuries. Bish. She learned that even in a kingdom ruled by the supernatural, hearts could ache, pride could break, and love could heal, or destroy. Yet it was not the lessons that held her attention. It was Azrael himself. He was distant, commanding, yet there were moments when he seemed human, almost fragile. She saw it when he watched the palace at night, when the wind carried voices of the past, and when he lingered near the library, his fingers tracing the spines of books filled with memories. She could not tell if he wanted to be seen or hidden, and that made him irresistible. One evening, as the blood-red moon hung low over Eldrith, Leora walked through the gardens, lit by the pale glow of lanterns, bare. The roses were black and deep red, their petals glistening with dew. The air was heavy with their scent, and the night felt alive, as if it were holding its breath. Azrael appeared from the shadows, silent as always, but his presence made her heart quicken. "You walk these gardens as if you belong," he said, his voice low, carrying both curiosity and warning. "I am learning," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I am trying to understand this world." He stepped closer, and for a moment the distance between them seemed to shrink. The red moonlight painted his face in sharp angles and soft shadows. "You do more than learn. You adapt. That is rare." "Bucks." Leora looked down at her hands. "And yet I still feel like an outsider." "You are not," he said firmly. Breath. "Your courage, your mind, they set you apart even here, even among those who have lived for centuries." She lifted her eyes to his, and in them she saw something unexpected, a flicker of vulnerability. The king, feared by all, was not without fear. "Do you regret anything?" she asked softly. Azrael's gaze darkened, the red of his eyes deepening. "Regret is the shadow of choice is made too late. I have lived long enough to know its weight." He paused, then added quietly, "Perhaps that is why you are here." Frowned, to remind me that some choices can still bring light.
The words made her pulse quicken. She had never imagined being so close to someone so powerful, someone so feared, and yet feeling that she could reach him.
But the peace was fragile. News of her arrival reached Kaelin faster than she expected. Breath. He had not stopped scheming. Even from afar, his arrogance and desire to control haunted her. One morning, a messenger arrived at the palace gates bearing a sealed letter. The seal was crude, not noble, but the message was clear. Kaelin had not forgotten her. Leora read the words carefully. "You think you are beyond me. You are still the same woman who once laughed at the world. You will come back to me, or your world will crumble." Bear. Her hands trembled slightly, but she did not let fear rule her. She knew Kaelin could not harm her here. Bess. Not with Azrael watching, but the letter reminded her of the world she had left behind, and of the pride and anger that had shaped her. Azrael noticed her tension. "Kaelin," he said, naming the name with measured calm. "He is still a fool. Do not let him steal your thoughts."
"I am trying," she said, but she could not deny the old pain.
Despair. "He never saw me. He never truly saw me." Azrael's hand brushed hers, a fleeting contact that sent warmth through her chest. "And now he does not matter." Inspiration. "What matters is that you are here, that you are alive." Bay. "That you are learning what it means to be free." Their connection was growing, subtle but undeniable. Every shared glance, every word, every quiet moment in the gardens or corridors deepened a bond that neither fully understood. Leora began to realize that freedom was not only about escaping the past, it was about discovering the courage to trust, to feel, to step into the unknown. But life in the palace was not without danger. The court of shadows was filled with those who envied her position, those who questioned a mortal bride walking among immortal kings. Whispers followed her through the halls. Eyes watched her from behind tapestries, from high balconies, from the shadows of the chandeliers. Brave. Some were curious, some were jealous, and some were deadly. One night, as she walked alone in the eastern wing of the palace, she sensed movement behind her. Perhaps a figure stepped from the shadows, cloaked and masked. Leora's heart raced, but she did not flee. Instead, she squared her shoulders and faced the figure. "You walk boldly," the figure said, voice low and rough. "For one so fragile." "I am not fragile," she said, meeting the gaze, though the mask hid the eyes. "I am not afraid." The figure laughed softly.
"We shall see." And with that, the intruder disappeared, leaving Leora with the chill of unease.
When she found Asriel in the library later, she told him what had happened. He listened silently, his expression unreadable. "You are brave," he said finally, "and yet you are walking a path full of shadows. Remember, not all shadows are meant to harm. Some simply test your resolve." "I feel like every step I take is a test," she admitted. "Perhaps it is," he said. "But you are stronger than you know, and soon the world will see it too." As the days passed, Leora continued to learn the ways of the palace. She attended court gatherings, met noble vampires, and navigated their subtle intrigues. She learned that power could be exercised with grace or cruelty, and that survival often depended on understanding the hidden currents beneath polite smiles. Through it all, Asriel remained a constant presence. He guided her, challenged her, and occasionally tested her patience. There were moments when his patience slipped, when the weight of centuries showed through the mask of the king. And there were moments fleeting and fragile, when he looked at her not as a mortal bride, but as a partner, an equal, a human being capable of touching a heart thought unreachable. One evening, the palace gathered to celebrate the Red Moon Festival, a night when the moon turned crimson and the city of Eldrith shone in candlelight and shadow. Music floated through the halls, mingling with the scent of exotic flowers and the soft murmur of conversation. Leora wore a gown of deep blue, her hair pinned back to reveal the curve of her neck. Bah! She moved through the crowd with quiet grace, aware of the eyes that followed her. Kaelin had learned of her presence and had sent envoys to the festival, hoping to provoke her or draw her back to him. But as the night wore on, it became clear that he would not succeed, not with Asriel watching, not with the strength Leora had discovered in herself. During the festival, Asriel appeared at her side, silent yet commanding attention simply by being there. Together, they moved through the gathering, a pair that drew both awe and envy. For the first time, Leora felt truly seen. Not by Kaelin, not by the court, but by the one whose power and presence both terrified and enthralled her. Bay, and yet danger lingered. In the shadows of the palace, whispers grew louder, eyes sharper, and a plan was forming, one that could threaten everything Leora and Asriel had built in these first weeks. The night ended with the red moon casting long shadows over the palace gardens. Leora stood at the edge of a balcony, looking out at the city below. Asriel joined her silently, and for a moment they simply watched the world together. "You are learning well," he said softly, "and soon the trials will grow. You must be ready." "I will be," she said, her voice steady. "I cannot turn back now, not after all I have discovered, and not after all I have felt."
Asriel's gaze softened, almost tender, and he brushed a stray strand of hair from her face.
Good. Because the world we face is not kind. And the shadows, they are patient. Leora's heart trembled, not with fear, but with the knowledge that she was stepping into a life larger, darker, and more dangerous than she could have imagined. And yet, for the first time in her life, she felt powerful, not because of her title or wealth, but because she had chosen her path. The shadows whispered, the palace hummed, and the night held its breath. Then somewhere in the distance a threat lingered, waiting for the moment to strike. The cursed forest outside Eldrith had long been a place of fear and whispered legends. Trees twisted unnaturally toward the sky, their gnarled roots forming walls that seemed to close in on travelers. Fog drifted between the trunks like ghostly spirits, hiding paths and dangers alike. Leora had heard the stories of mortals who wandered too far and were never seen again. Yet now, with Asriel at her side, she felt the thrill of both fear and discovery. "You must stay close," Asriel said, his red eyes cutting through the mist. "This forest is old and patient. It watches. It remembers and it tests all who enter." "I will," Leora replied, adjusting the cloak around her shoulders. The cold night air bit at her skin, but her resolve was stronger than her fear. She had survived courts, whispered threats, and Kaelin's arrogance. She could survive this. Asriel moved silently ahead, his presence a shield she could almost feel. The forest seemed to respond to him, shadows shifting as he passed, as if recognizing him as master of light and dark alike. Leora followed, her steps careful but unwavering. By it, she realized that her fear was mingling with fascination. The world she had known of city streets and grand halls was nothing compared to this living, breathing, mysterious wilderness. "Why bring me here?" she asked after a long stretch of silence, her voice echoing slightly. "To teach you," Asriel replied. "To show you that the world is not only what you see, but what you feel, what you sense, what you survive. And perhaps to show you something else, about yourself." She glanced at him, noting the quiet power in his movements, the way he seemed untouchable yet tethered to her by something invisible. Her pulse quickened. Leora had begun to understand that she was no longer just a mortal bride. She was part of a story far larger than herself, a story with shadows, bloodlines, and destinies intertwined. As they delved deeper into the forest, the fog thickened, and strange sounds echoed around them. Rustling leaves, distant cries, the snap of twigs underfoot. Leora's senses heightened. Every shadow could hide a threat, every flicker of movement a warning. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shifted. Asriel's hand shot out, gripping hers with surprising strength. "Watch your step," he said. "The forest tests your mind as much as your body." Leora nodded, her grip firm, heart racing. She trusted him, yet a small part of her could not help imagining the legends, the dangers she had been warned about. But she would not show fear. Not here, not now, not to him. Hours passed, and the forest seemed endless. But yet there was a strange beauty to it. The way moonlight filtered through twisted branches, painting silver paths on the ground. Leora felt as though she were walking in a world between life and dreams, where danger and wonder existed side by side. "You are stronger than you know," Asriel said quietly, "and braver than many who have lived for centuries." "I am learning," Leora replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You have taught me that strength is not only about fighting, it is about knowing what matters and protecting it. Osriel's gaze softened. And yet, protecting what matters often comes at a cost.
You must understand that.
She nodded, her mind heavy with thought. She had already begun to see his world, not the fearsome king seen by outsiders, but the man beneath the centuries of solitude and burden. And in that understanding she felt something growing inside her, a bond that was both terrifying and exhilarating. It was then that a shadow moved ahead, faster than the eye could follow. A figure emerged from the mist, and Leora's heart skipped a beat. It was Kaelin. "You, how did you find me?" she asked, anger and disbelief mixing in her voice. Kaelin's eyes burned with envy and obsession. "You cannot hide from me, Leora. You were always mine to claim." Bows. Asriel's presence shifted, the air around him tightening like steel. He stepped forward, a quiet command in his stance that made the forest itself seem to bow.
You will leave, he said simply, voice calm but lethal. Kaelin laughed, a sound that grated against the quiet of the forest.
"Bess. Or what? You cannot harm me." Asriel's red eyes glimmered. "Perhaps, but you will find that this world is no longer yours to command." The forest seemed to respond to the tension. Trees swayed violently, roots rising from the ground as if alive. The mist thickened, curling around Kaelin's feet. He stumbled slightly, unnerved by the strange power emanating from Asriel. Leora's heart pounded, but she did not falter. "Kaelin," she said firmly, "you are not part of this world anymore. You do not control me." I will not let you go." Osriel's hand moved almost invisibly, and the shadow surged forward, not to harm, but to contain. Kaelin struggled, shouting, but the forest itself seemed to hold him in place. It was not violence, but authority, an undeniable power that left him helpless. Leora stepped closer to Asriel, feeling the warmth of his presence.
Birth. I will not be afraid, she whispered.
"You are not afraid,"
He said softly, his voice brushing her ear. You are learning courage.
"Aye. And soon you will see that courage is more powerful than any sword, any curse, any threat." Kaelin, realizing he was outmatched, finally pulled back, his face red with rage and shame. "This is not over," he spat. "You may have the king's protection, but one day, one day." And then he was gone, swallowed by the forest as suddenly as he had appeared. Leora exhaled slowly, feeling the tension drain from her muscles.
You were magnificent, Asriel said quietly, brushing a strand of hair from her face.
Calm, brave, unshaken. Few mortals would have spoken as you did. I did not feel magnificent, she admitted. I was terrified.
Fear is not weakness, he said.
It is proof that you are alive, that your heart beats, that you care, and it is precisely what makes your courage remarkable. They walked in silence after that, the forest no longer threatening but alive with strange beauty. Leora felt her connection with Asriel deepen with every step, but she began to understand him, not just as a powerful king, but as a being who had carried centuries of isolation and regret. And she realized that she could touch him, not with magic or influence, but with understanding and courage. Hours later, they emerged from the forest, the first light of dawn painting gold across the horizon.
Leora looked at the palace in the distance and felt a strange mixture of relief and anticipation.
Bet, She had survived the forest, confronted Kaelin, and discovered something within herself she had never known, strength beyond fear, courage beyond pain, and a heart willing to trust. Asriel turned to her, his expression unreadable yet tender.
You are learning quickly, Leora, and that is only the beginning.
She met his gaze, her own filled with a new determination.
I will continue learning, she said.
I will not turn back.
I want to understand.
Bess, everything, even the parts I fear. And you will, he said softly, because you are not alone. And because, for the first time, I am not alone either. Their bond had grown, subtle but unbreakable. Trust and understanding now connected them, stronger than fear, stronger than shadow, stronger than the distant threats that lingered beyond the palace gates. But even as they returned, Leora felt a lingering unease. The forest had tested her, yes, but Kaelin had been only a glimpse of the dangers still waiting. The court, the shadows, the enemies of Asriel's line, all would seek to challenge her, to test her resolve, to see if her courage would falter. She did not fear them, but she understood that the path ahead would demand more than bravery. It would demand loyalty, wisdom, and the ability to face not only threats in the world, but the shadows in her own heart. That night, in the quiet of her chambers, Leora looked out at the palace grounds. The moonlight shone silver on the fountains. The black roses swayed gently in the garden, and the air carried a soft hum of life and magic. She realized that her heart was no longer hers alone. It was intertwined with Asriel's, bound by trust, courage, and something that neither fully understood yet, something far more powerful than fear. And as she fell into a restless sleep, she dreamt of shadows that were not frightening, but protective, of eyes that watched over her with care, and of a world where danger and love existed side by side, shaping destinies in ways she could not yet imagine. The palace of Eldrith seemed almost alive that morning. The black spires glimmered under the rising sun, yet shadows clung stubbornly to every corner, as if the world itself had held its breath for what was coming. Bad. Leora stood at the edge of the balcony, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear. She had faced the forest, survived Kaelin's ambushes, and learned the weight of power in Asriel's world. Bess. Yet today felt different. Today the threat was not distant or hidden. It had arrived at their doorstep. Kaelin had returned, this time accompanied by a mysterious figure draped in dark robes, their eyes glowing with a cold light. Rumors whispered in the palace halls suggested this was an enchanter from the northern lands, one who had mastered curses beyond mortal comprehension. Asriel appeared at her side, silent as ever, his presence commanding and reassuring. He looked at her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low, carrying the weight of centuries.
Leora drew a deep breath.
"I am," she said firmly, though her chest trembled. "I will not run." Not now. Not ever." Asriel's eyes softened for a moment, and he took her hand. "Good. Remember, strength is not in your power alone. It is in your heart, your courage, and your choices. You have all three." The two of them stepped into the great hall, where Kaelin and the enchanter waited. The room felt charged with tension, the air thick with magic and intent. Kaelin's sneer was sharper than ever, but there was fear hidden beneath it, fear of what Leora had become, fear of the unknown power she now wielded by standing with Asriel.
You think you can defy me? Kaelin spat.
Brands. You are still the same girl I once knew. You will come back to me. Leora's gaze did not waver. "No," she said, calmly. I am not the girl you knew. I am stronger, and I am not yours to claim. The enchanter stepped forward, a swirl of shadow and cold energy curling around their hands. Then you will fall, the figure intoned, voice echoing in the hall. The curse will bind you both, and nothing can break it. Azrael moved slightly in front of her, his aura flaring with energy that made the shadows bend and twist. Perhaps, he said slowly, but you have not faced us both together.
The battle did not erupt with noise or chaos.
It was a clash of wills, subtle yet powerful. Shadows swirled around Azrael and the enchanter, crackling with energy. Barris, Leora felt the pulse of it beneath her feet, the hum in her chest, the pull of magic that was both dangerous and intoxicating. You must trust me, Azrael whispered, brushing a hand against her arm. Bast, your courage, your heart, they are weapons stronger than any curse. Leora nodded. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the energy around her. She had learned patience, understanding, and strength in the forest. She had faced fear, and in doing so discovered power she never knew she had. Now she let it flow through her, letting her will merge with Azrael's. The enchanter struck first, sending a wave of dark energy toward them. Azrael met it with a barrier of crimson light, the energy crashing like waves against rock. Leora stepped forward, placing her hands on the light, guiding it, shaping it. Her heart beat in rhythm with Azrael's, and together they formed a shield strong enough to repel the attack. Kaelin's eyes widened in disbelief. He had counted on her fear, her hesitation, her weakness. Pest. Yet she stood unflinching, a mortal heart commanding forces far beyond what he understood.
Impossible! Kaelin shouted.
You are only human. I am human, Leora replied, voice steady. But I am not afraid. And fear does not control me anymore. The enchanter hissed, frustration seeping through the calm mask. They tried again, weaving a more complex spell, but Leora anticipated the movement, guiding Azrael's power to counter it with precision. Each time she felt herself growing stronger, the shadows responding not with harm, but with obedience to her courage. Finally, the enchanter faltered. Azrael's crimson aura surged forward, combining with the energy Leora had harnessed, and the dark figure was pushed back, forced to retreat. Kaelin, seeing the failure, tried to flee, but Azrael's presence blocked the exit. You are finished, he said, his voice quiet but unyielding. Leave Eldrith and never return. Kaelin's face twisted in anger, but the will of the vampire king and Leora's courage left him powerless. With a final glare, he turned and disappeared, leaving behind only the echo of his rage. The hall fell silent. Leora's chest heaved with exhaustion, but there was a lightness in her heart. She had faced the shadows, protected herself and those she loved, and survived. Azrael stepped closer, his eyes softening as he looked at her. You were remarkable, he said quietly. I knew you could do it, but seeing it is more than I imagined. Leora smiled, fatigue and relief mingling in her expression. I could not have done it without you, she said. You taught me to trust myself. Azrael reached for her hand, lifting it to his lips. And you taught me to see what I had forgotten, he said. To trust, to hope, to feel again. You are more than my bride, Leora. You are my partner, my equal, my heart. She had never expected to hear such sincerity from someone so feared, so powerful. Yet there it was in his eyes, in the way he moved toward her, in the quiet authority that now felt gentle when directed at her. Pair. The palace seemed to breathe with them. The shadows that once threatened now seemed to recede. leaving light in their wake. Leora realized that she had not only survived but had transformed. The timid girl who had once fled Kaelin's sneers had become someone strong, fearless, and full of purpose. In the days that followed, the palace adjusted to the new balance. Whispers of Leora's courage spread through Eldrith, earning her respect even among the immortal court. Breath. She walked with confidence, no longer merely a mortal bride, but a woman who had faced shadows, curses, and fear, and emerged stronger. Asriel and Leora's bond deepened. They shared quiet moments in the gardens, discussing the past, the future, and the responsibilities of ruling a kingdom that bridged mortal and immortal worlds. They laughed, debated, and even argued, but always with respect and trust. Their relationship was no longer defined by fear, obligation, or survival, but by choice, love, and shared strength. One evening, beneath the silver light of the full moon, they stood on the highest balcony of the palace. The city lay below, peaceful for the first time in years. The black roses in the gardens glimmered with dew, and the air carried a quiet hum of life and magic. "I never imagined a life like this," Leora said softly, leaning against Asriel's shoulder. "Nor did I," he admitted, his voice low and warm. "I thought centuries of solitude would harden me forever. But you changed that. You showed me that love and courage can exist even in darkness." Leora looked up at him, her eyes filled with trust and something deeper, something that had grown from fear and fascination into understanding and devotion. "I was afraid once," she said, "but not anymore. And I know now that I am stronger with you than I ever was alone." Asriel's eyes glowed softly, red like embers, but filled with warmth. "And I am stronger with you. Not because you wield power, but because you remind me that even a king must care, must feel, must love." They stood together in silence, the world quiet and still around them. For the first time, Leora understood what it meant to live fully, to trust completely, and to love without hesitation. The palace, the city, and the shadows themselves seemed to honor that truth. Yet even in their peace, the memory of Kaelin and the enchanter lingered. Leora knew that threats could return, that darkness never truly vanished. But she also knew something more important. With courage, trust, and love, they could face whatever came, together. And as the first light of dawn painted gold across the palace spires, Asriel held Leora close. "We have survived the shadows," he said softly. "And in surviving, we are free." Leora pressed her hand to his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath her fingers. "We are more than free," she said, a smile lighting her face. "We are alive, truly alive, together." And in that moment, standing atop the palace with the wind in their hair in the city below, Leora and Asriel understood that their journey, though it had begun with fear, curses, and danger, had led them to something far greater than either had imagined, something eternal, something unbreakable.